There's been some new information regarding the Policing and Crime Act 2017, and I'm answering some questions sent in by you guys on the subject. It's coming up. So firstly, the Policing and Crime Act 2017, or the PCA. Commencement date has been issued now, and that is the 2nd of May 2017. That means that this law now comes into effect. If you are unsure of what the law entails, I'll put a little information button above. You can watch my other video on it. But it basically means on the 2nd of May, any gun that is capable of firing full auto or burst mode has to, by law, not exceed an energy limit of 1.3 joules or 370-ish FPS on a 0.2 gram BB. And the same for semi-automatics or bolt actions, except it's on a 0.2 gram BB again, except the energy limit on them is 2.5 joules and 520 FPS. So that's the commencement order date, 2nd of May 2017. You need to make sure your guns comply with that law by then. After that, you're basically committing an offence by having your guns above those energy limits. Now, what does that mean to you as a player? Basically means that you've got to make sure your guns are compliant within those laws by the 2nd of May. We've had plenty of time to know that this is coming into effect, so it shouldn't be too much of a drama for most of you guys. I know I've checked all of my guns. You know, as soon as as soon as I found out that it was going to be, you know, the law was going to be enacted. Unfortunately for HPA users, gas blowback users, and the issues of the DMR, the home built DMR type things, nothing's been confirmed on that yet, so we're still waiting out for information on that yet. As soon as that information does become available, obviously we'll push it out there, and so that you guys can do what needs to be done, basically. But unfortunately, the UK Airsoft Players Union and UKARA, the UK Airsoft Retailers Association, they're still trying to find out information on how these guns are going to be tested if they're you know, in the unfortunate case that your guns get confiscated. So once that information is found out, as I said, I'll do a video on it. I'll post it up on Facebook and stuff, and we'll get that information out there. So again, just keep an eye out for that information. I'll go into some questions now. Some of you guys sent in some good questions. I'll cover these. If you've got any further questions, again, just tag them in, type them in the comments below this video, and I'll do another video as time goes by. Inland Airsoft asks, does this mean I am going to have police officers knocking on my door seizing all my guns? No, not really. It's important to remember that these laws, they're not aimed specifically at Airsoft. The Home Office they've given Airsoft an exemption to allow it as it is now. So that, I mean, one way you could look at it is they've actually already been quite accommodating for Airsoft. This law coming in as part of a wider crime reduction policy and reform thing for laws and stuff, and it's basically just to define a firearm. If your guns fall within the law and are within those energy limits, you'll never have a problem. So that's not a drama. If your guns are over those energy limits, then as the saying goes, you know, play with fire, get burnt. You're intentionally breaking the law. You know, we've all had plenty of time to make adjustments. For most guns, unless you're a gas blowback HPA user, obviously that's a separate issue, but all AEGs and things like that, it's a simple, easy fix to make sure your guns are compliant with the law. So, you know, the other thing to consider as well is that your guns aren't registered. They're not like real firearms, where the government's got a database of everybody that's got an airsoft gun. So once that date kicks in, if your gun is over the limit and you genuinely have arranged for it to become under the limit, you know, the police aren't going to kick your door down on the 3rd of May and arrest you for it. You know, obviously make sure your guns are under that limit, but you know, it's not going to be a case of police knocking and kicking doors in. You know, this isn't here to penalise airsofters. We've just got to be compliant because it's the law, basically. We're just a side effect, unfortunately. Mutts nuts. Yeah, it's got 2 questions. First question is, I've got a Tipman M4 HPA. It's internally regulated, so it can't be amped up unless I change the internals, and I've got a flow restrictor installed which keeps it at steady 340 FPS. Do you think this will be okay? Short answer is, I don't know, unfortunately. If the Home Office come back and they say, you know, with regards to HPA testing and gas blowback, if they come back and they say, we're going to test all guns as they are found without making any modifications during the testing process, then as long as you get your gun under that 370 FPS limit, you'll be fine. If you got in the unlikely event that your guns do get confiscated, they'll test them as they find them, and you know, it'll be fine. If, however, they announce that they're going to make modifications or changes during the testing process to see what that gun could produce in terms of power, for example, gas blowback, you know, black gas in a warm room, to see how much FPS they can get out of that, or with a HPA system, you know, whacking that regulator right up, then obviously you've got to account for that, and that's where the problems are going to come. So at the moment, in short, I don't know. Until that confirmation comes back from the Home Office, then you know, it's impossible to say really. Mutt's second question, which is more of a statement. It's crazy, how do they know it's lethal? Has anyone in the UK been killed by a rif above 370 FPS? I'd love to know where they get this shizzle from. It's important to remember that these laws they're not specifically for airsoft. Airsoft is an unfortunate casualty, if you will, of this law coming in. If you forget about airsoft for a second, the law comes in. It's basically they're defining what is a firearm, and they've set basically a barreled weapon firing a projectile at 1 joule with an energy limit of 1 joule. Anything above that becomes a firearm. Basically, that's what they've said. There was nothing in law before that actually defined what a firearm was, so to speak. So our airsoft guns are firearms. Now they've given us an exemption, so we can go up to that 1.3 joule and that 2.5 joule for semi-auto single shotguns. Basically, they've given us those exemptions. What this law basically says, if you breach that 570 FPS limit, they're not saying that your gun is lethal. It's not all of a sudden lethal. It's basically, it falls back into the firearms category. And the reason they've set it at 370 is because in the testing they did, they found that fully automatic fire at 370 feet per second and above can cause too much damage than they were happy with. And we've all seen the videos of guys having to pull BBs out of their face and things like that. So basically, once you go over that 370 FPS for any airsoft gun, let's say, it then becomes a firearm. Again, it falls back into the firearms category. Now, if it's a fully auto capable gun or a burst mode capable gun, that then becomes a Section 5 prohibited firearm, which is massively illegal unless you've got a Section 5 firearms license, which is really hard to get. Only very small amount of industries and people can get those. So you then get in trouble for possession of a Section 5 firearm. If your gun's a semi-automatic only, obviously you've got that exemption all the way up to 520 FPS. If you then go over that 520 FPS limit, again, it falls back into the firearms category. It's not illegal to own it in that instance. You can, it just becomes an air weapon. So in the UK, well, in England and I think Wales, you don't need a license to own an air weapon. I think in Scotland you do now. But the problem there isn't the ownership with that. The problem is because it's then a firearms, it comes in as an air weapon. If you then start shooting people with it at an airsoft game, you'll then commit an offence of assault with a weapon. That's where the problem lies with that. So it's not that all of a sudden they're going to become, your airsoft guns are suddenly going to become lethal as such. It's that they're moving to firearms categories and you start committing other offences with those airsoft guns. That's where the law lies there. Batman asks, can I ask, what if after the new law comes into effect you end up with a pretty gun that was legally bought with hard-earned cash and VAT paid? Would there be any monetary compensation if these guns had to be handed into the police? No. I haven't read anything that said there would be any sort of refund or compensation. And as far as I'm aware, when they've done amnesties, when things like this have happened, not amnesties, sorry, when gun laws have changed in the past, and people have had to hand in firearms, there hasn't been any monetary compensation then either, from what I understand. So yeah, there won't be. RAF Bikers, he asked a long question, but the most prevalent part was, will applying for a firearm certificate mean these limits mean diddly squat to me if a permit is granted? No. Getting a firearms license, as I said before, it's not going to help at all. Once you exceed those limits for, 370 for full auto capable guns and 520 FPS for semi-auto guns on 0.2 gram BBs, those two categories of airsoft guns then move back into the firearms category. So this one then becomes Section 5 automatically, which, unless you work, I think people like armourers for the film industry that use fully auto capable guns, and gunsmiths and things like that. I think that, you know, it's really hard to get a Section 5 firearm certificate. You're not going to get one as an airsofter, basically. So that's out of the question. That's not going to happen. With the other end of the scale, with your single shots and your bolt actions and things, even having a firearms license isn't going to stop you from breaking the law there, because once you go over that limit, you can't. It's then an air weapon. You can't shoot. You can't shoot it at people. You know, it's like turning up to an airsoft site. But in terms of the law, it would be turning up to an airsoft site with an air rifle and shooting people with a high-powered air rifle. That's the way it's going to be in the law. So a firearms certificate and license is not going to help you in any way. You just need to make sure your gun's under these, you know, those energy limits of 1.3 joules for fully auto, or 370 FPS roughly, and then 2.5 joules for single shots, or 520 FPS. Obviously, all on a .2 gram BB as well. Andy Raven says, so sites are going to have to measure in joules and FPS now, or just FPS? I imagine most sites will stick to FPS, although, you know, I can't really say. There's not going to be any requirement, as long as, you know, if all sites stick to current, you know, what happens in the UK, the current average site limit of 350 and 500 FPS, you know, most sites aren't going to really have a problem. So I imagine most sites will probably stick to 350 and 500 for 350 obviously for AEGs and things, and then 500 for semis and bolt actions. Robo's Adventures asks, suppose I have a CO2 powered single shot airsoft handgun, what would the FPS limit be? Because it's single shot, your legal FPS limit on that is going to be the 520 FPS, or 2.5 joules. It's unlikely sites are ever going to let you play with a pistol running at that temperature though. So in terms of using it, you should be trying to hit that you should be getting it below 350 FPS. But in terms of the law, it's absolutely fine. You know, as long as it's below that single shot FPS limit of 520, really. But as I said, you're gonna have to get it below 550 to play at game sites. Wolf Airsoft asks, I have a CO2 pistol which is hot at sites. It does around 380 FPS. What should I do? Again, if it's a semi-automatic only pistol, you're absolutely fine legally at that FPS. Sites aren't going to let you run with that, but in terms of the law, you're absolutely fine. You're still below that 520 for single shot guns. If it's a fully auto capable gun, then obviously you need to get it below the 370 FPS, you know, so you need to do some changes there internally inside the gun to get that power down. Noel Arthur 141 asks, what about quick change spring guns and ICSs with split gearboxes? They can't be regulated. If you have an upper gearbox that shot at say 400 FPS and another shot at 320 FPS, then you could easily mess around with the system. People at the Home Office know nothing about our sport and should not have a say in this. Even with the restriction of 370 FPS, an airsoft gun that is 371 FPS is a Section 5 firearm. Look, at the end of the day, you know, if you're intentionally going over those laws, if you've got two gearboxes and you're intentionally going over those laws, then you're intentionally breaking the law. So you are falling into the category of criminal, basically. You know, it's not a good thing for the sport for anybody to be intentionally trying to circumvent these laws and get higher FPS. I've never played at a site that allows any full auto gun above 350 FPS anyway. Apart from one game we played a little while back, and they allowed support guns up to 400 FPS as long, but they had to be deployed onto a hard stand to fire. If you've got two gearboxes, you know, two upper cylinders, you know, like for PTWs and split gearbox system for the ICSUs, you know, I've got both of those. If I was to upgrade and get one up to 400 FPS, like you mentioned, and I was caught doing that, then personally I would hold my hands up and say, yeah, I tried to circumvent the law, I got caught, my own fault. You know, if you get caught doing that, it's your own dumb luck, basically. You know, that shouldn't be the argument. The 371 FPS, if you go over, again, that's not really, it shouldn't happen. If everybody aims for the 350 FPS that the UK uses at the moment anyway, you're not going to have a drama. There is a problem with the HP and the gas blowback users. Obviously, there is potential there for the guys to set their guns up within the legal limit, and then obviously it goes over when testing. But that still needs to be confirmed. But if we're talking AEGs and things like that, there is no excuse whatsoever for your guns to be over that limit. We've had plenty of time to get this sorted. They're easy fixes. Any airsoft shop that's got a gun tech can do these fixes for you and get that FPS down. So you know, it shouldn't be an issue at all. So there we go, that's it for today's video. As I said, 2nd of May 2017, that's when the commencement date is. That's when this law will come into effect. Everybody needs to make sure their guns are compliant. If your guns aren't compliant yet, get yourselves down to an airsoft shop where they've got a gun tech. You know, it's not going to be much work for most airsoft guns to get those within the legal limits. You know, we shouldn't be looking at this as the government are trying to throw us all in jail and take our guns off us, sort of thing. You know, they gave us that amendment, that exemption from the limit. They could have just looked at other countries. There's plenty of other countries out there that have a 1 joule limit on their airsoft guns. They could have looked at that and said, you know, you guys, it works for them. We'll keep it with, you know, you guys can do the same. So just make sure your guns are under that limit. Don't try and circumvent the law. You're just gonna get yourself in trouble eventually, and you know, you're gonna make the sport look bad by doing that. So try and remain compliant. I know some of you guys will be disappointed there's no HPA or gas blowback user information yet. No further updates on how they're going to do the test then. I myself, I've got a gas blowback. I want to know what they're going to do in terms, you know, I've got an L119A1 build that's basically hanging on this. You know, I've got parts coming in for it that I've already sort of sourced. You know, so I feel your pain for those of you that are still waiting. Unfortunately, all we can do is try and make our guns as compliant as we can with what we've got. Once that information is published on the UCAPU page or by UCARA, I'll feed that out to you guys as well. So keep an eye out for that. If it's your first time to my channel, I'd love to have you subscribe. You know, I do appreciate every single one of you guys that subscribes, and just hit that little button there and that'll subscribe. And if you've got any further comments regarding the PCA or anything else, any questions you want answered in a further Q&A session, just stick them in the comments below. That's it for today, as I said, and as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.